But after that, I encourage you to certainly stick around. We have a very, very fascinating discussion session on digital change management. And then a discussion about what's going to happen in the near future with the payers and the government, specifically with the changes that are very likely going to happen. And we have speakers who can speak to that in great detail. So very excited. And then afterwards, we'll have a drink in the reception. And we always look forward to feedback and comments from our audience, especially from all of you, about how we can improve this next year, what you like, what you didn't like, and I look forward to hearing back from you. So I'm going to start closing the doors and start discussing a little bit, introducing John Hanke. And John is the founder and CEO of Ninantic Inc., which builds real-world experiences that foster fun, exploration, discovery, and social interaction. Ninantic is a developer of Ingress and the global phenomenon Pokemon Go. Originally incubated as a startup within Google, Ninantic was founded by John as an independent business unit dedicated to exploring new kinds of mobile applications at the intersection of entertainment, location, and social. And in late 2015, Niantic was spun out of Google as a separate company with backing from investors, including Google, Nintendo, and the Pokemon Company. John eventually became the VP of the, when he was at Google, was a VP of the Geo Group and launched a number of other innovative products, including scaling up Maps and Earth to cover the entire world, launching a fleet of Street View cars, creating an innovative aerial photography platform, creating Google's own global base map, and much more. In background, also, John received his MBA from the Haas School of Business at UC Berkeley in 1996, and as a BA in Plantin from the University of Texas at Austin. I'd say that I am also personally grateful to John for making time to coming. You probably wonder how I could possibly have such a connection, and that happens to be one of those serendipitous things. That John actually leads the Boy Scout troop for my son. And that speaks so much to the humanity of some of our speakers here that as busy as he is, he makes the time to do that. I'm eternally grateful because I can't figure out how I make time to do what you're doing with our kids in the Boy Scouts. And so when I was looking at who could we invite to break it up a little bit so we get a little bit out of our comfort zone, as we talk about normally, that is in my sphere of influence to some degree. And poor John got stuck with me asking, hey, would you mind coming to speak to our group? So thank you very much for coming. And ladies and gentlemen, please have a warm round of applause for John Hanke.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, are we good? Yeah, well, hopefully we'll make this worthwhile for you guys. I don't normally talk to doctors, physicians, medical groups, people in the medical technology space, but I think there is an intersection between what we're doing and your world, and I think the only way that we're going to get the most out of it is to collaborate with folks like you. So maybe some interesting conversations will come out of this. I am going to talk about Pokemon Go. Just to refresh your memory, this is a scene from sort of Pokemon Go summer. This is in Taiwan. And the people in the background there, the sort of hordes of people, are on their way to capture Pokemon. So this is one of many such scenes that unfolded around the world this last summer. And, you know, probably if you guys saw that on TV, you were going, WTF is going on? And we kind of felt the same way. We had no idea that things were going to take off in the way that they did. But it's been a really interesting ride, and we're really excited about what it means for our company and what hopefully we're going to be able to do going forward. It didn't happen overnight. It is something that was in the works for a number of years, and I think the best way to kind of explain where did Pokemon Go come from is to really go back a few years and talk about the product that we built before that and kind of why we built it. There was a group of us that started this group, Niantic, within Google, and we only recently spun out. About a year ago, we became a separate company. Many of us were involved in Earth and Maps and Geo, so we come at this from the area of location. So the whole concept of getting people outside and going to different places in the real world was inspired by all those many years of us staring at maps and satellite images and thinking about what kinds of things we could do with that data. It was also inspired by my son. Stefano mentioned Scouts. My oldest son just graduated from college. My youngest one is now in this Weeblo Scout troop. But I, like many of you parents out there, have probably are struggling, with the same issue, which is spending a lot of time on the screens. And is this a good thing? And is there something else we should be doing? And for me, as somebody who's spent my whole career in technology essentially building applications designed to keep people glued to their screens, I felt like it would be an interesting challenge to think about, hey, could we build an app designed for mobile that's really designed to get people outside and doing something fun and healthy and something that families could do together. So that was really kind of a key inspiration. Some people talk about AR as the field that we're in. I think that's generally true. A lot of people are looking at AR versus VR, and I know some of you maybe even are involved in AR and VR. I don't have anything against VR. I think it actually, for people that are housebound or bedridden or lack the ability to move, it could be a miraculous thing. But for able-bodied people who can go out and do things, I'm not as big of a fan of it. I'm much more interested in the tech that we can use while we're out, kind of leading our lives fully as human beings, using all of our senses kind of out in the real world. So reacting a little bit against kind of this possible future. Our theme, we call it Adventures on Foot, and it really is about using the technology that exists today. This would be cell phones, the billions of them that are out there, and wearables like Apple Watch and some other devices that I'll talk about, to create play experiences that are akin to the experiences you probably had as kids, and that we all kind of fantasize about going out and just having fun playing outside with our families. We did have 3 goals that we set for ourselves to kind of keep us on track when we started the company. We wanted all the products that we built to be about discovery, about learning new things about the city that you live in or the place that you're visiting, to see the world with new eyes was kind of one of our new agey kind of themes, based on encouraging exercise, as I've mentioned, and based on a concept that we call real-world social, which I will talk more about. But that's basically just building activities that can be done in groups with your friends or family outside. So when we're filtering what projects we're going to do or what the features of our product should be, it has to pass this test. Augmented reality, I view it as a continuum. So sometimes when people hear the word augmented reality, they think, oh, that's some weird-looking goggles that you put on your face that are going to come at some point in the future, and everything's going to kind of look different through the goggles. I would define augmented reality as technology that's ubiquitous, that's always on, that you're carrying with you, that enhances your experience with the real world. So I think cell phones can be a delivery mechanism for AR, and wearables, and there will be a continuum of devices, I think, that we use while the goggles, which I think we'll eventually get, are being built and perfected. My estimation, that's still a few years off. AR is a pretty big business. I won't spend a lot of time talking about it here, but a lot of people do think it's a bigger opportunity than VR, simply because it is something that you can merge into your daily life that can enhance many of the things you do: social, gaming, shopping, and something that you can do for that would be part of your daily life in the same way that your cell phone is, versus a VR experience that maybe is something that you're going to do for a session for 1 or 2 hours. So in terms of the history, the first product we built was called Field Trip, and it's still out there. You can still download it for iOS and for Android. It's purely an informational kind of product. So it's designed to be like a really knowledgeable local as you're walking around your neighborhood or place that you're visiting, that's going to tell you interesting things about history, culture, architecture of the environment that you're in. I really loved it. I think of it as our kind of, it's like our PBS kind of app. It's sort of this do-gooder, like, it's going to inform you kind of app. It did not take off in the same way that Pokemon Go did. So it was about encouraging movement and providing information to people, but it lacked that sort of gaming element. And we didn't initially know that we were going to do games. So that was sort of the first kind of experiment for us. After that, when we saw that it was an interesting product, but not one that had that real virality to it, we said, well, let's take that same data. Let's take these interesting places, historical markers, public artwork, interesting architectural landmarks, and build that into an actual game. And so we built a game called Ingress. It came out about 4 years ago. I don't know if any of you heard of it. It was our thing before Pokemon Go. And we wrapped all that in this sort of science fiction theme. And so a lot of what's in Pokemon Go actually grew out of our building and operating this game for several years. So since I'm assuming some of you may not be familiar with it, I'll show you about a 60-second video that shows some players playing the game, so you'll get a sense of what it's all about before I talk more about it.
Incoming message.
You are under attack.
I
I need to get these fields up.
In some ways, Ingress is a war, where we have two sides and we're competing.
So for those of you who are new to Ingress, it's a really great game where you capture territory by throwing links from one portal to another.
If we let that link go, it will ruin half of the operation.
I'm gonna link.
Oh, whoa, 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 whoa!
We're not going to do that until France confirms they are ready to leave.
Hey, we're on top of the mountain! 3 links create a field, and within that field, the more people that live, the more points that you get for your team.
I was amazed that Tom kept going.
I just made a link.
Tom was making more links at the end than I was.
You're right there with your other teammates and just constantly battling.
We're getting down to the wire. This could be a deal breaker for us.
So that maybe gives you a little bit of a sense for what the game is like. It's really kind of a global game of capture the flag. You play with your cell phone. You have to go to different places in the world in order to play. It's 2 teams competing against one another. So we put it out as kind of an experiment at Google, and we started seeing some really interesting things. The game started to get traction, and it was encouraging people to do some things that we never expected. People like renting helicopters to go capture portals in hard-to-get-to places. Commercial airline pilots ferrying digital objects around the world to other players. People taking commercial airline flights to kind of the far ends of the earth in order to gain a strategic advantage over the other team. There were people who modified wheelchairs and motorcycles and cars in order to have better access to Ingress while they were on the move. People started doing some what we thought were kind of insane things. People climbing to the tops of mountains in Italy and in France. People circumnavigating Berlin over a weekend on foot to capture all the portals around the city. So the game was, clearly having a motivating effect on people, and we didn't, fully understand why. We started seeing people get tattoos. There's 2 factions that compete against one another. Each of them has a symbol, and people started getting permanent tattoos of this. At the time, the game was still in beta. All Google products sort of stay in beta for a couple of years, so all this stuff could change in our minds. But once we saw people kind of doing this, we decided we better not change the logo. And then, you start sort of seeing like what the appeal was. People were meeting other people playing the game and socializing together. Maybe people who hadn't had a rich social life before. Inevitably, people began dating. Engagements, marriages started happening. After a year or 2, these people got married and they had babies. They even named some of the babies after characters in the game, which was a little unsettling to us. But generally, I think it's a great thing that this kind of human relationships were coming out of what started out, just as a game for us. The other side of it that was unexpected was a fitness sort of angle. And we didn't design it as a fitness app. We didn't think of it as a health-oriented app. But because it requires that you go outside and requires that you go to different places in order to advance in the game, in order to compete in the game, people were getting a lot of exercise. So we started getting this kind of fan mail coming at us on social media saying, I feel great, I've lost X pounds playing the game. The other thing that was surprising is that the profile of these users didn't necessarily fit what we thought it was going to be. We were kind of targeting gamers. I was thinking my 13-year-old son at the time. I was thinking young males. And we started seeing a lot of female players and people that were older than what we expected were taking up the game. In fact, I was surprised when I started to meet senior citizens at some of the events that we started having. This woman, when I met her, was around 70. She had had a hip surgery. She was diabetic. And her son had introduced her to the game. When I met her, she had already walked 1,000 kilometers. She's since crossed 10,000 kilometers walking while playing the game. And she was probably the first senior that I kind of connected with, but as it turns out, there were a lot of them out there that adopted the game. So, end of the day, spread around the world, is still actively played in more than 200 countries, over 20 million downloads, and we've measured, distance walked by everybody playing the game collectively at over 340 million kilometers at this point, basically to Mars and back. So the social element, though, was the key learning for us, and it was the fact that people were meeting other people playing the game. We think that's what was really sticky about it, and that, along with the exercise component, which was making people feel better about themselves, was the thing motivating people to do things like, get tattoos. We started with just a very not well-planned meetup. We announced we were having a meetup at a certain place. A few dozen people showed up, but they really enjoyed meeting other people playing the game. There was a little bit of organized gameplay that we had sort of set up for them. It was a day kind of like this. We happen to have this in Missouri. I won't explain why, but it was kind of off the beaten path, and it was a sleety, rainy day, and people had a lot of fun hanging out outside with strangers playing this game. So we started planning more of these events, and they started getting bigger and bigger. Since it was a global game, we just started arranging these kind of matches at different cities around the world, and it went from dozens to hundreds to thousands of people. This at the time was our biggest event ever. It was around 3,000 people in Munich, but they got even bigger after that. Shortly thereafter, we had an event in Tokyo with over 5,000. We had another event in 2015 which was over 7,000 in Kyoto. So they turned into these sort of Comic-Con meets of 5K is how I would describe it, in that people are coming to play this kind of sci-fi game. A lot of them are coming in costume. They've got flags. They're coming in their local groups. They're traveling from all over the place. In Kyoto, we had people traveling from all over Asia. People travel from all over Europe to our events there. In the United States, people travel from all over the country. So they're kind of communing together and having this really great, active experience. These are not people, though, they're going to go to Boston and run the marathon. They're gamers. They're not necessarily the most fit people in the world, but they're getting a lot of exercise while they're playing, and they're having a lot of social activity while they're playing the game. And then this last summer, we had our biggest event ever in Tokyo, where we passed 10,000 people. We now do these on a regular basis, 2 or 3 times a quarter. We have these events, and we simultaneously do them in Asia, Europe, and the United States over the course of a weekend. And as I mentioned, that stickiness surprised us, but I really attribute it to the fact that people are feeling better about themselves and to these social connections which they're making with other players. So all that was the background to Pokemon Go. It was, as big as Ingress is, I would consider it kind of a cult hit. And we thought about, well, how do we bring this out to even more people? And there was a relationship at Google with some people at the Pokemon Company. Just given the backstory of Pokemon about how these virtual characters inhabit the world, we thought it was a perfect sort of starting point for an augmented reality game. We reached out to them and made an agreement to develop the game and worked on it for a couple of years and then launched it this last July. The results, we got anywhere from 100 to 1,000 times more traffic than we anticipated on different measurements. It is still one of the most played games on the internet, period. I think it was the fastest growing game in history. We have many hundreds of millions of downloads at this point and many tens of millions of active users. It was great to see some of the things that people did with the game that we didn't necessarily expect. Things like summer camps, adopting the game as an activity that the camps could do together with the kids. Libraries were one of the location feeds that we used to kind of build this game board around. And it was really awesome to see librarians embrace the game as a way to promote people visiting the library. We actually saw that happen all around the world, some of them very creative on social media, using it as a way to get kids in libraries and hopefully reading in addition to playing Pokemon Go. Zoos were another data point that we ingested and we thought would be good places for Pokemon Go gameplay to happen. Zoos around the world also jumped on the bandwagon. There's a zoo in Singapore that created its own poster of all the Pokemon Go locations within the zoo. Los Angeles Zoo, many others had events through the course of the summer, and many of them are still having regular events. Botanical gardens, those places that you never want to go. Certainly your kids never want to go. Like you'll never convince your kids to go to botanical gardens until Pokemon Go. And they're actually great places to visit. They're great places to play Pokemon Go because they're really interesting places to walk around, and there's beautiful stuff there. So we seeded them with lots of Pokemon, and it was really fun to see the botanical gardens embrace that trend and use it as a way to draw more visitors to their sites. And then we started to see people sort of commenting on the potential health impact. Parents simply happy that there was an app that they could use to do something outside together with their kids. And then there were some people in the medical profession that started using it in ways that we certainly never expected. I'll play about 40 seconds of this video. This is from Mott's Hospital at the University of Michigan in their pediatric unit.
Get it?
Pokemon Go came out about a week ago, and immediately people everywhere were using it. And here at Mott, what we were doing with it was we were using it to help patients get out and see the world. Kind of a sneaky way to get kids to exercise. Not only are they walking around and getting really excited, but they're also doing certain movements. So if I'm trying to get a kid to raise his arms up or to squat down, I can say, hey, the guy's a little bit lower, can you reach down and get him? And that's just a really tricky way that physical therapy or occupational therapy can get a kid to do the exercises that he was screaming and crying about 5 minutes ago that he didn't want to do. But now, not only does he want to do it, he's trying to catch that Pokemon. And so we're taking...
So I didn't play the full video, but he goes on to talk about how a lot of the kids wanted to go out and explore the hospital, kids that they were really anxious to kind of get up and moving. So it was interesting, not something that we expected at all. So other just sort of newspaper stories about the potential as a motivator to encourage people to become more active. And then senior citizens with Pokemon Go. Again, even though we had seen that with Ingress, we were still surprised when it started happening with Pokemon Go. It seems even less likely of a fit with seniors. But it's kind of a thing. People taking it up, grandparents playing with their grandkids, and then also in some care facilities, it became something that they introduced to people living there. This story recently hit from Taiwan. Apparently there's this hot springs resort there where a lot of people go to, a lot of senior citizens go to, and like Pokemon Go is a thing there. There's also the mental health benefits that people talked a lot about, and we see this on, just anecdotally on social media. I don't think any studies have been done about this, but it's essentially people with, problems with depression or anxiety, basically saying, hey, this got me out of the house and made me feel better, made me feel great. In many cases, people are saying this has done more for me than the actual, real therapies and drugs that I was under before. So, intuitively, I think I can see how, just people getting out and being active would have a positive effect, but it would be great to see some actual real research on this. In terms of autism and Asperger's, there have also been a number of, again, just anecdotally, parents coming and saying, my son had autism, and this has been phenomenal. This has motivated him to go outside, interact with other people, to be more comfortable outside. We've seen this story surface numerous times. And you can intuitively, you can maybe see how that might make sense. I understand that a lot of kids who have this condition, they're often really into video games, but they have a hard time with outside or a hard time with other people. So I can see how it might be helpful in that area. I don't know of any real studies that have been done on it, but I think, again, it's a really interesting notion and probably deserves some follow-up. And there have been a couple of studies that have been done on the actual physical exercise side of things. So there are two that I will briefly kind of mention here. The first of these was done by some folks at Microsoft and Stanford. We didn't participate in these in any way. We didn't sponsor them or provide any data, save one exception I'll talk about in the next study. In this case, they looked at users using the Microsoft Health Band, and they looked at queries that they made on the Microsoft search engine to determine who was playing Pokemon Go, and then they measured their activity 30 days prior, I believe, and then for 30 days after they began to play Pokemon Go. And they measured a significant increase in people's steps after they began playing Pokemon Go, which you might expect. The key thing that I thought was interesting that they called out was the fact that the effect was seen across men and women of all ages and of all body types and physical conditions. So it was different than the other. They had some other health apps that they studied to compare it to, and those other apps generally were appealing to people that were already healthy and already active. And the difference with Pokemon Go was that it was drawing people in who weren't, and who were, in fact, significantly under the mean and well below the recommended amount of daily activity. So those people boosted for 30 days. There obviously is some fall off, and I think that's kind of the key question that's open, is how long can you sustain this? But they did note for those most engaged players that they continued to be active all through the study. Some folks at Harvard did a similar study with different methodology. They recruited a panel online, and those users submitted screenshots of their Pokemon Go gameplay and levels and their steps from their Apple iPhone. But they did a similar thing, which is looking at the impact on their on the physical movement of the people who began playing Pokemon Go. The results were similar. In this case, a little over a 20% increase on average after people began playing Pokemon Go. They also noted that that attenuated over time, but that for the most involved cohort, that the activity level sustained. The only piece of data that we provided was we provided our total user number to them, and they estimated, based on extrapolating the results of their panel, an incremental 2 trillion additional steps were taken by the US population as a result of the launch of the game, which was interesting. So we've continued to sort of grow and expand Pokemon Go post-launch. We introduced this product, the Pokemon Go Plus, which is a lightweight wearable device. It's designed to get at one of the, I think, shortcomings of Pokemon Go, in that you have to look at your phone to play the game. This is obviously somewhat problematic whenever you're outside moving around. It's a limitation of the technology. So the wearable lets you know when you're near a Pokemon, when you're near a Pokestop. You can actually harvest items and attempt to capture Pokemon just with a wearable device, so you don't have to have the phone. It's designed to be something that a parent could give to a kid, for example, so the kid can have the Pokemon Go Plus and the parent can have the iPhone safely tucked away in their pocket. And we also launched on Apple Watch just before the holidays. Similar type of functionality using the Apple Watch. The kilometers walked will help you hatch your Pokemon eggs. You can harvest items from Pokestops, and you can see what Pokemon are nearby just by glancing at your watch, again, without having to look at your phone. So we tabulated total distance walked and Pokemon caught just before the holidays, over 8.7 billion kilometers walked. That's the distance to Pluto, and I think most of the way back. And 88 billion Pokemon caught in total. Very, very active user population. We continue to what we call live events. We introduced new Pokemon. We had a whole series of events through the holidays that was very well received. Special holiday Pokemon, special items that you can collect. That type of programming will continue, and our goal for the game is to run it for many, many years. In terms of what's next for us, our goal initially was to create a platform for many types of experiences like this. That we could build and that others could build, and we do have some other projects that we're working on, none that I can share in detail with you today, but in addition to Pokemon Go and Ingress, there will be other games that we'll launch in the future. So thanks. I'm glad to have a chance to tell you a little bit about what we've been doing. I guess we can have some questions, and would love to make some contacts in the sort of health industry who might be interested in doing research or collaborating in some way.
John, that was amazing. I actually was tearful when you showed the impact that this had on kids and stuff. It's amazing. Now, I am with distinct pleasure of having Einar Sawyer in our department, and she's a real world expert in some of these areas, and I've asked her to do the Q&A with you afterwards. But I do want to introduce Einar. She's an assistant clinical professor at UCSF. In our department, she combines interest in innovation and clinical expertise in orthopedics. And she's also director of the USCSS Skeletal Health Service and director of the Pediatric Bone Health Consortium. I think you have more titles than that, but that's probably enough for now. Okay, great. Thanks.
Cool.
This is more important. Is this on? Great. Thank you. John, that was fantastic. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Thanks.
So we have been tracking the AR and VR experiences outside of healthcare for a while, and we really we recognize the power of engagement and distraction that we're seeing from the gaming industry, but also from these technologies. And there are actually early signals in the literature, if anyone's interested in some of the literature that's out there. It was interesting to me to find a systematic review of articles around AR in medical training, 27 so far. So that's an area of great interest, but we really do see the potential in incentivizing healthy behaviors, which you've demonstrated in probably more numbers than we could ever put together in any kind of study. But what I'd like to find out is if we could drill down on that a little bit. You naturally tapped into some of the behavioral science principles of having people do things because it's fun and because they are socializing, which we know is also very important in healthcare. We know that also activity is really important in maintaining health, and you've tapped into that as well. So I'm curious about how you can see an interface between the healthcare world and your world in a way that we might come up with some more specific use cases around healthcare. Are there opportunities to do development, partnering with your company in that? Are there development portals or that type of access?
Well, I hope there'll be opportunities in terms of, maybe first starting with studies and then looking for, ways to, change the structure of the game itself to encourage new behaviors or to improve the way that, that we're directing folks, and then maybe opportunities to customize, these products or develop completely new products that are tailored to those uses. I think it's really important from our point of view that you start first with the game and making a great experience that people really want to use and to do. We don't want to, tell people to eat their broccoli. We want it to be, something that people are coming to organically. Well, I mean, one of the things we found, again, with Ingress, it was kind of accidental, was that some of the things that are kind of good for you in terms of engaging socially with other people in real life and being active outside actually have these, this effect of making people feel good. So it's a positive loop. If we can stimulate that activity, we found that it caused people to enjoy playing the game. In fact, they attributed the fun that they were having and the way that they were feeling to the game. Really it was the fact that they were interacting with other people, I think, and that they were being active. But it was kind of funny. It's, I think unlocking that is, it's challenging, but if you can do it, it's fantastic because it's sort of a self-perpetuating cycle. If people begin to feel better and do these things, they just want to do it more. And that's the holy grail of game design. You're looking for these loops that people just want to do over and over again. In our case, we wanted to try to combine that with not just clicking on monsters online or something, but with some type of behavior that would be inherently maybe have a side effect of being positive.
I'm going to push in a little bit more into an area that we talked about a little bit in our prep session, and that is the signals are all extremely exciting. But one of the things we noticed is the same thing we noticed in a lot of our health interventions, particularly the ones around wearables and the mobile applications, is that we might get an exciting adoption and engagement for a period of time, but we're seeing significant drop-off in the engagement. And I'm really curious from your industry if there's some lessons we could take and port over to healthcare of how do we sustain engagement in these, where we see positive signals and response, but we start to see drop-off in a few months.
Yeah, well, that user retention is the holy grail of game design, and it's an economic necessity for companies in the space, so we kind of have to understand it. That's the reason we were paying particular attention to Ingress as to why these players continue to play a pretty simple game month after month and actually year after year. And we really zeroed in on the social side of it, as well as the feeling good from physical activity. But the social bonds that people formed through the game, I think are probably the single strongest retention force for Ingress. And so therefore, when we kind of designed Pokemon Go, we're putting in elements, some of which are in the game today, some of which we'll be rolling out over the next several quarters, but that are designed to encourage that type of social play and to encourage people to form those social bonds with other players. We think that's critical to keeping people engaged over the long term.
And I think you had mentioned varying the content, which is something that we're a little bit slow to do on our side. Our messages get a little bit redundant, including eat your broccoli. But what I wanted to go to next was we also feel it's really important to go from the promise to the power of any of these technologies to have evidence, effectiveness and care and cost and outcomes, et cetera. So I don't see in the literature a lot of quantification. There's some activity measurement that went on, certainly step count. What I'd like to get at is we'd like to add more quantification, physiologic measurements, biometric measurements. We have capabilities now that we can do this in wearable fashion. If we brought that in not just as a measurement tool, do you see it actually being incorporated into some of the gaming aspect of it in terms of the content itself?
I think it would be a design challenge, but a really gratifying thing to tackle to figure out new behaviors that would be helpful to people, that would be fun elements of a game to incorporate. You and I were talking about heart rate and this idea that you need to have a certain number of minutes of elevated heart rate during the day. We've thought about, would it be interesting to have a game element where the person had to lower their heart rate and to be really calm before they could unlock something in the game, for example. Or maybe there could be elements in the game where you have to do something very active for a certain period of time and then lower your heart rate and then something unlocks that you can proceed to take the next step in the game. But all that, we would want to do only with, close coordination with doctors and people that really understand, what's good for people, what could be potentially dangerous, so that we, craft the right experience there. And the first step, I guess, will be just kind of learning what effects you can generate are, and then thinking about, what variables and, what kinds of goals that you could direct people towards.
I think you'd have a lot of people interested in working on that with you in here.
Cool.
I'd also like to, we have about 2 more minutes, I think. Would that be right, Stefano? So one of the other things that we're interested in, of course, is improving the patient journey. And this means so many things. But if you can imagine extrapolating a little bit more on the Children's Hospital example you gave, and even leveraging AR, and it could be in Pokemon format, of how does a patient get made more comfortable with what their journey is going to be? Because it's like landing on a different planet when they come into the healthcare system. So leveraging AR in that capacity, and even maybe Pokemon Go itself, in terms of what we're trying to work on now is a prehab phase where we're trying to incentivize people to make healthy choices, even leading up to their surgery, implement the mobility incentivization in hospital, and then carry on with it once they're at home and in their community. And could you imagine that we might be able to tailor Pokemon Go around those types of processes?
Yeah, when you mentioned that earlier, it was really interesting. It was the first time that it occurred to me, right? It's not something that I was even aware of, that you would be thinking about that experience before and, during the healthcare process for a kid. I mean, it's challenging, right? I mean, we, as a relatively small company, we're about 70 people. We're trying to serve, a large mass market with our product. How do we do that and at the same time, potentially tailor things or customize things for a use case like the one you're describing? One way to do that might be through some kind of extensible API. I think Minecraft's an interesting example where you've got a lot of modders and hackers who are modifying it and creating all kinds of interesting things, some of them really interesting from an educational point of view. So I think that's food for thought. And just sort of understanding those scenarios, hearing about them from people in your profession is great for us to understand and to start the wheels moving in terms of thinking about how we might support those kinds of use cases.
Well, I can hear a lot of wheels turning in this room, so I'd like to open this up to the audience. I think we have time for a couple of questions. And first hand that goes up has a great opportunity here to talk to John. Please.
John, congratulations. What you guys accomplished was staggering in terms of the launch of Pokemon Go. But I wanted to ask you, there are a bunch of hospitals across the country that outlawed it, right? That said, we don't want Pokemon Go here. There's HIPAA violations. We're getting people coming to the hospital that aren't supposed to be here. Did you guys augment the game in any way, or is there the ability to customize it for certain environments? Is that something you guys have considered?
Yeah, so the locations that we use in Pokemon Go were ones that had been built up in Ingress. These are the locations that you visit to acquire items. They're called Pokestops and Gems in Pokemon Go. It's a crowdsourced data set. I mentioned that we seeded it initially with libraries, museums, parks, zoos. Then users submitted other locations, and some of them were in hospitals. That had the beneficial effect of, in the case of the mod example, that Pokemon are spawning and there are Pokestops accessible to the residents inside the hospital. They didn't have to go out in order to access the game, but it did mean in some cases there were people who were accessing the hospital property that in certain hospitals decided that was a bad thing and they didn't want that to happen. And so we were requested, removed those locations from the game. It's a bit painful to do because we also were aware of the, the positive use case, and it was, unfortunately our system just wasn't sophisticated enough at that time to allow a finer grained implementation where you might have it accessible to certain people but not have it accessible to other people, such that you could serve both. In our cases, initially it was binary, and it was simply had to be there for everyone, or it had to be removed completely. And we've done that in a few other locations as that issue came up, and I think we've now gotten to a good situation where the places where it was kind of causing some friction have been dealt with, and also people understand the product better. A little bit of the initial reaction was, I wouldn't call it, it was a little bit of people freaking out just at the crowds and the craziness that caught all of us off guard. But now that we're at a more normal level of user engagement, really those problems are almost non-existent right now. But we are doing, we are making some changes to the system to allow a finer grained treatment of locations so that locations can be active only at certain times a day. And, for hospitals, whether something could be available for, residents of the hospital and not to others, we haven't gotten to that point yet, but that would be kind of food for thought for future product improvement.
I think we can take one more from the room. Yes.
You know, that's the fun of the game is discovery. You're going to have to go outside and put in some steps.
I want to thank you. I have one more question for you. Because your figures in Pokemon Go have become iconic and are in some ways passing Steph Curry, could they be exploited to give positive health messages?
The Pokemon characters.
Yes.
Well, you know, I've seen some interesting unlicensed usage of that. There have been a couple of campaigns in different cities related to STDs with the "gotta catch 'em all" like phrase.
Back to know your audience.
Yeah, that was not done with any agreement. So, but perhaps, yeah.
Thank you so much. It sounds like we have it's fertile soil for a whole new world of innovation for us in healthcare. Thank you so much.
Cool. Thank you.
That was really an exceptionally intriguing talk, and we're now going to go into another segment that's somewhat different, and that is on change management. So one of the things that we're designing this conference is pretty clear if anybody's been in the administrative side of healthcare or any organization that's trying to drive change, is that you can find the best app, the best thing, whatever, but if your organization isn't ready to ingest it and to absorb it, it's not likely to succeed. And there are some tools available to us to make that happen. It was worth reviewing them. Now, I also have to say that, and I'll bring it up later. In fact, I will bring it up later. So I'm going to introduce instead our moderator for this session. Dennis Boyle, I met at Stanford's Medicine X conference when I heard him speak about design and change and the impact that design has on the way we interface with the world around us. And Dennis started IDEO, is one of the founding partners, and is really a massively important person in that world. And I saw him up there, oh my gosh. And I went up to him and just sheepishly asked, do you mind if I speak to you for a few minutes about a few things? And he was kind enough to give me some time and has since given me a tremendous amount of information. I want to thank him very publicly for his help with organizing this conference, his forceful directive to me to move forward and start a movement. And so thank you, Dennis, for that. So I'd like to invite him up, and he's going to moderate this session for us. Thank you.